14 FRQs, questions 1 through 5. Let's look at it. Goodness. Just reading a little bit first. Okay, so essentially we have 100 students that either live on campus or off campus and either do 0, 1, or 2 extracurricular activities. A just says calculate the proportion of on-campus students who participate in at least one extracurricular activity and off-campus who participate in at least one off-campus. So for part A, on campus, now it says at least one, that means we need to take into account the 17 and the 7, because that's 1 or 2 out of the 33 total on campus. Just 24 to 33, which I think we can just leave as a fraction. It's not really going to round nicely. Yeah, so we'd say it's approximately 0.7273. All right, if you round that to 4 places now for off-campus, just kind of matching where I would put it there. For at least one extracurricular activity would be 25 and 12. 25 for the 1, the 12 for the 2, over the 67 total, and that would be 37 over 67. What's that? 37 over 67. To 4 decimal places is approximately 0.5522. Okay, part A, not as bad, we just have a crazy table. Up next, they give me this crazy chart. Now, I guess we can kind of see here on campus at least one activity. We can see that that takes up, about almost 75%. So you can see that, here would be about 0.25, so that makes sense. 0.5522 for at least one. Again, you can see the majority, just a little bit more than the majority, because 50 would be right here. So 0.55, yeah, that makes sense. That's right there. You can kind of see how it's split up. Okay, anyways, write a few sentences summarizing what the graphs reveal about the association between residential status and level of participation. Okay. So if I'm going to write a few sentences, here's what I'm going to say. From the graph, we can see that students who live on campus are more likely to participate in extracurricular activities than those living off campus. All right, again, that's kind of clearly seen because look at how big that black bar is for on campus. It's about 25%. Off campus, it's about 45%. So clearly, living on campus, you're more likely to do at least one activity. Now that's obvious there. Something that is also kind of interesting. The proportion of students who are in 2 or more extracurricular activities are, I'll say, roughly proportional. You could say approximately. All right, now in other words, you can see that they're not that far different in how much space they take up. So they're almost the same width, so that means they're almost the same proportion. So in other words, if you're the type of student who's going to do 2 or more extracurricular activities, living on campus or off campus isn't really going to change you that much. I mean, think about who that person is. They're in this club, this thing, that thing. They're dedicated no matter where they live. So that's just kind of one thing we see there. And then last but not least, we can say that living status also seems to impact those who either don't participate, or really just saying the same thing in a different way, in activities, or participate in one activity the most. All right, so in other words, that second sentence is rewritten in a third sentence. You can see that obviously 2 or more doesn't really matter. The biggest difference in the widths of the graphs are in between on-campus none and 1 and off-campus none and 1. We can see that there's a big shift that happens between being on campus and not doing anything and being on campus and not doing anything. Again, I mean, I can tell you myself, when I was a freshman at UCF, when I lived on campus, I did intramural floor hockey because I had a friend who just said, hey, you should do this. And so that was my one activity when I was on campus. And when I moved off campus, I didn't do that because just the time it took to get there, the extra time away from studying because I'm a nerd, just wasn't enough for me to go on campus and do that extracurricular activity. So I definitely found myself in this graph, and that's really about all I can think to say there. So up next, let's look at part C. So we have some chi-squared testing. Now we aren't covering chi-squared this year, but we can still cover the ideas of hypothesis testing. That's still a good thing to do. And we actually don't need to know anything about chi-squared testing to answer this question because they give us the HO and the HA and the p-value. So we can totally make a conclusion even though we don't know what test it was because concluding is always the same. Let's see here. HO is there's no association. HA is there is association. Okay, here's what we're going to say. We're going to say, since the p-value of 0.23 is larger than most alpha, so I'll actually spell it out. Alphas used in testing, kind of put a parentheses there, usually, so typically, alpha equals 0.05 or alpha equals 0.1 All right, so hopefully you kind of have that in the back of your mind that that's not crazy for me to make that statement. We cannot conclude, in other words, if p-value is larger than alpha, we can't go with HA. We can't conclude that there, and what do you conclude? Well, you just restate what they wanted. So we can't conclude there is an association. You just restate what they wanted you to say. Between residential status and level of participation in, just say, extracurricular activities. Just trying to move on. Get to the scoring guideline. You should try to not do that among students at the university. Now, again, don't leave any of that out. Really, honestly, restate the whole thing. That is how you get a perfect response in your concluding statement. Restate exactly what they wanted you to test. And you'll see that in the wording of the question somewhere. Okay, so let's score myself. Again, I'm not guaranteeing that I'm getting everything right. Here goes nothing. 2014. So we get 0.727, which I got. We get 0.552, which I got. And I showed the exact work, so I feel like that's a perfect step there. So again, always show exactly where you got things. Again, the 17 and the 7, the 25 and the 12, I've been getting better at that since seeing videos. Okay, the graph reveals that on-campus residents are more likely to participate in extracurricular activities than off-campus. Okay, awesome, nailed that. Proportion who participate in 2 or more activities are similar. Nailed that. On-campus residents have greater proportion of participating in one activity. Now, I think I pretty much got that in part B, but we'll talk about that in more detail below. Again, part C, I pretty much nailed it again, so feeling pretty confident. So now I used alpha 0.05 or 0.1, but they also include 0.01. That's also typical. So we don't have strong evidence to conclude participation in extracurricular activities differs, or in other words, that there is an association. So I totally nailed that as well. So I feel pretty good about this question. I've been learning. So I respond correctly, and both calculations with work shown. There we go. Part B. Did I correctly compare proportions between 2 groups in at least 2 of the 3 categories? So yeah, I did talk about that they were roughly the same for extracurricular, and that living status impacted those the most. Now, one thing I could have done a little bit better is just elaborated on this sentence a little more, saying, clearly that those who lived on campus were more likely to be in one than none, and those who live off were more likely to be than none in one. Now, then again, part C. Okay, do I state the correct conclusion in context? In other words, did I literally copy and paste the exact wording of the question and justify that based on the p-value being larger than an alpha? Yes, I did. So those are everything you need to do in a concluding test. A concluding statement always involves the p-value and then the context of the question. So perfect response, starting off good. Hopefully it stays that way.